The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
Yet another example of weak labor law in the U.S. How a ruling by the Labor Board against Amazon may actually help the company to fight the union. Meanwhile, Labor Lab's out with their latest Union Busters report. And today on the show, we check in with the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. Welcome to the Monday, April 6th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Jon Harvey will be our featured guest on the show today. He is president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. We're talking about 15,000 members across the state of Ohio. OAPFF.org is a website you want to go to. Let me repeat that, OAPFF.org. Jon is actually retired from the Middletown, Ohio Division of Fire. This after over 30 years of service as a professional firefighter and paramedic. He rose to the ranks from firefighter, paramedic to lieutenant, captain, ultimately serving as captain at Station 81. And in that role, he led the city's hazardous materials response team and served as co-chair of the Butler County Regional Hazmat team. And he holds multiple state certifications, including Fire Officer 1, 2, and 3, Fire Safety Inspector, Fire Instructor, Rescue Tech. He also earned degrees in Fire Science from the Sinclair Community College and Eastern Gateway Community College. He became active in the union. This would be a local 336, serving as trustee, vice president, and president, which brought an appointment on the legislative committee of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. And his leadership continued as he was elected as the 4th District Vice President, where he served 12 years in that position before being elected to the Professional Firefighters Association. That happened in 2022. So we'll talk a little bit about his background. And because of his expertise when it comes to emergency situations dealing with hazmat, we're going to talk about the fact that the state of Ohio lacks a statewide response for a horrific emergency. And, you know, we hear this in various parts of the country about preparedness. And, you know, when it comes to safety, we're going to get into all of this with Jon because he's very, very upset with the lack of funding and training for what could be a horrific accident. So Jon Harvey, on behalf of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters, will be our featured guest on the show today. That website, again, is OAPFF.org. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. We're talking almost $40 billion of assets under advisement now. They are growing. BoydWatterson.com is a website you want to go to. You got to listen to this story because the National Labor Relations Board issued a decision finding that Amazon Services failed in its duty to bargain in good faith with the Amazon Labor Union Local 1, an affiliate of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters at the JFK 8 warehouse. This was a big story when it happened. Wow, Amazon is going union. Well, wait to hear this. The decision sets the stage for Amazon to challenge the union's original victory in 2022 in the courts. Now, we need to point something out here. The National Labor Relations Act does not provide an avenue for direct judicial review of a union election. So, When a party wishes to challenge a union certification, a common practice is to refuse to bargain and challenge the unfair labor practice in the Court of Appeals. And that's been going on for almost 4 years now. Though Amazon has not filed this request for review, they have indicated their intention to do so. Eileen Hands is a spokesperson for Amazon, and she said, this is a quote, "We are confident an unbiased court will overturn the original certification, and we look forward to the opportunity for our team to fairly voice their opinions." So, what happened in 2022, even though the labor board said that Amazon failed to bargain in good faith, well, everything has to be reset. They got to start all over. Well, we have to talk to the Teamsters on this one. This is absolutely crazy. Want to do a shout out here to Bob Funk and his team at the Labor Lab, laborlab.us. He's been on the show a number of times, and every week he comes out with what they call the LM20s. And these are reports that have to be filed. Sometimes companies are slow to file, but companies have to file them if they're going to hire, say, a union buster. If they see that somebody's going to try to form a union, well, they call their attorneys and they say, you know what, we got to fight the union. And that's what the LM20 is all about. One of the big union busters, and I've seen this time and time again, is LRI Consulting Services, Green Investment Partners, which is based in Ohio. They hired them for $425 an hour. They were also hired by a Fort Worth Report out of Texas, $425 an hour. But guess what? That union election won. They didn't get their money's worth, I guess. Value Point Material Solutions out of Michigan hired East Coast Labor Relations for $4,200 a day. That election is still open. Beacon Sales Acquisition, doing business as QXO Inc. They're out of North Carolina. They hired LRI Consulting Services, again, $425 an hour. We don't have any updates on that. USC Saltville, doing business as United Salt out of Texas. They also hired LRI. Same fee, $425 an hour. SCA of California hired Government Resources Consultants of America. That election's still open. Now, Innovative Demolition out of Kentucky hired National Labor Relations Advocates, $3,000 a day, plus a $15,000 security deposit. That election has been blocked. Penfield Webster Emergency Medical Services out of New York hired National Labor Relations Advocates, again, $3,500 a day, $20,000 security deposit. That election was held, but there are challenges. And we have one more here. Prime Data Centers out of Illinois hired Independent Center for Worker Education, $3,000 a day. But it didn't work out. That election was won. You want to get some more information, just go to laborlab.us. Bob does a great job on that. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferentz.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org.
America's Workforce Radio is sponsored in part by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 6, representing painters, glazers, drywall finishers, and sign and display industry workers. They remind you that belonging to a union is your right as an American.
It takes LiUNA to build North America's infrastructure.
From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LIUNA members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LIUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. You know, when it comes to first responders, well, first of all, it's a very dangerous job. You never know what you're walking into, whether you're a police officer, you're a paramedic, you're a firefighter. You got to have the proper equipment. You got to have proper staffing. And you got to have cooperation from communities, whether it's a state or local or federal government. Joining us on our live line right now is Jon Harvey. Jon is president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. The website is OAPFF.org, OAPFF.org. And sadly, and Jon, you know this, it usually takes an emergency, a calamity, a tragedy for especially elected officials to wake up. And I go back to 9/11. And look what happened since then. I mean, we didn't have a TSA back then. We didn't have Homeland Security. Or, for instance, a bridge would collapse. And I remember there was one in Minnesota some years back. And there was some warning saying, you know what? This is structurally deficient. Nobody listened until the collapse of the bridge. And people died, sadly. So you have a very dangerous profession. You know that. You never know what you're walking into, and especially you throw in hazardous chemicals, train derailments. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So when it comes to emergencies, I can only imagine that you kind of grit your teeth and you wonder what's going on. Talk to me about that, Jon, and hopefully this platform, this podcast will move the needle in the right direction. Go ahead, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. You know, to your point earlier, when you just think of building codes, the standard building codes that we operate off of now comes from, you know, just pure tragedies that have happened in different kinds of fires, whether it be high rise or even residential fires. So to your point, you're spot on with that. Yeah, and hazmat is no everything we do is the same way, and hazmat is no different. And you know, I always like to say that when you respond to a hazardous materials incident, it's one of the most complex, dangerous, and has the highest potential for loss of life than any other calls that we go on. And sadly, when you look at that, because of the complexity of it and the cost of it, there's really insufficient training available for first responders.
What happens? And I'm going to reference East Palestine, Ohio, which happened 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And like I said, you don't know what you're going into. Maybe you could speak to what needs to be done, because I guess you have an idea of what chemicals we're dealing with, but how do you sort that out? What's the process on that, Jon?
There's multiple, whether it be rail, whether it be containers on the highway, whether it be in different packaging materials. You know, they're all supposed to be labeled. They're all supposed to have a transportation log that's with either the truck or the train. For example, East Palestine, when that train derailed, multiple cars were damaged. So then now you have multiple materials mixing together, which when that happens, it's hard telling what it's creating. It can be very easy and it can be very complex. And unfortunately, when you get to those very complex incidents, that's where you really need the technical training to be able to try to break all the different chemicals down to try to figure out what's exactly happening and what kind of PPE you need, how far we need to evacuate. Is it getting into the drinking water? Is it getting into the ground table? Is it airborne? We got to worry about wind and where the winds are taking it. So, like I said, there's just so much to a hazardous materials incident that you got to consider.
And you almost have to do that on a moment's notice. That's a crazy thing because these fires, I mean, they blow up and it's instant. You got to be there right away and you got to figure it out right away. And that's where the training comes in. So
Correct.
talk to me about where we are with the training. And I'm reading that, here we go again. There's not enough money for the training. Maybe you could paint a picture of the scenario right now with the training and what we need to make sure that it's adequate.
To your point earlier, when we talk about a fire as a first responder, when we talk about your residential house fire or an auto accident or injuries from a fall, whatever we're responding to, we don't hesitate. We run in. That's just the way we're made.
Yeah.
And when you have a hazmat incident, you really have to, as hard as you can, pump the brakes to try to get as quick as you can that picture of what's happened, because one bad mistake, or I should probably say one misstep, could not just end the first responders' lives, the occupants' lives, the neighbors' lives. Really, it could destroy an entire community if what you're doing is wrong and you're not mitigating it in the right situation. Just thinking of the layout of Ohio, if you drive from Columbus to Cleveland, 90% of that drive, you're in rural countryside.
Right.
And, if you have an incident in downtown Cleveland or downtown Columbus or downtown Cincinnati, you're going to get a pretty experienced hazardous materials response team to respond, to be able to respond quickly. You get out to a mixed county area or something like that, you're going to get people who have little to no training pulling up, and they may be there for 45 minutes to an hour or maybe even longer before a skilled response team can get there. They have to make decisions. They have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's putting a lot on those jurisdictions that just don't have the resources to mitigate it.
So, John, what's the answer for that? Because you're talking about two different worlds here. The big cities have the personnel, they have the equipment, and most likely they have the training. But like you said, there's a big stretch where that doesn't happen. Now, does the state come in? Do they have to come in? And there has to be a discussion going on somewhere in Columbus about that gap that needs to be filled right now, because this is a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, there's the state EMA, and then each county has their own EMA. Again, it comes to financing, right? So you have a larger county, they're going to have a more robust EMA system. They're going to be able to afford more. So we really count on those EMA systems and mutual aid agreements for these types of incidents. But there needs to be more regional cooperation, more regional training, so that those 4 or 5 counties can come together and put together a response system for this area. To your point earlier, we talked about Katrina and the formation of the incident management system, because of that tragedy, and that's how we learn things. But unfortunately, here in Ohio, we were on the national news for weeks about East Palestine. There was such a big uproar, and we got to fix this, but time's come and went, and I don't see any great change at all.
Yeah. Believe me, we've talked to the rail unions, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way. We just had them on the show not too long ago. And when it comes to rail safety, what you're just talking about speaks volumes, because the politicians all of a sudden, and this is on the right and the left, they said, oh, yeah, we got to create some legislation. And they did, the Railway Safety Act, but it hasn't gone anywhere. You know, the railroads are doing everything they can to dilute it. And we've had many conversations on the show on that very point. John, I got to take a quick break here. Jon Harvey is president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. The website is OAPFF.org. We'll continue with John right after this. And once again, you're listening to America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org.
America's Workforce appreciates our sponsor, the Columbus Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, who represents more than 18,000 workers from 19 affiliated local unions and district councils.
The Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers are proud to be a title sponsor for America's Workforce Radio. The Insulators Union is leading the way in the mechanical insulation industry, fire stopping, and infectious disease control. Regarded as North America's energy conservation specialists, these professionals are known for their professional work and dedication. You can learn more about the Insulators Union at insulators.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org. America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Our featured guest today is Jon Harvey. Jon is president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. We're talking 15,000 strong across the state of Ohio. The website is OAPFF.org. We've been talking about the lack of funding, lack of statewide response, lack of unified command when it comes to firefighting. Jon retired from the Middletown, Ohio Division of Fire after 32 years of service last year. In one of his roles, he led the city's hazardous materials response team and served as co-chair of the Butler County Regional Hazmat team. Jon, one of the things we want to talk about on the podcast today is the fact that there's a lack of unified command. I guess you got to pull all the resources together, coordinate them, especially in an emergency. You got to do this on a moment's notice. And obviously, you have a lot of experience on this. Can you speak to where we are right now and what we need to do to make it better? Go ahead.
Just speaking to kind of how that command system works. You know, when we get called in to wherever the incident is, whether it be a steel mill in Middletown, Ohio, or Interstate 75 running through the edge of our town there's other jurisdictions, there's other players, for lack of a better term, that are in charge of, responsible for wherever we're at. So like when we would roll to the steel mill on an incident, you know, none of us are experts in making steel, but they are. So we would always try to bring them into the command system so that we can talk through what's happening, why it's happening, or even if we're about to do something, you know, they say, hey, you definitely don't want to do that. If you do that, this is going to happen and you're going to have a bigger problem. So unified command just really is bringing all the players together. And to build on that example, I'm sure we've all been stuck on the interstate when there's a accident of some sort. We try to work with the Ohio State Patrol to keep the scene safe, but also trying to keep the traffic flowing so that backup doesn't get tens and hundreds of miles or whatever. So it can be something as small as that, just trying to keep traffic moving, or something as large as what you had in East Palestine, which were the first responders and didn't have the resources to mitigate that emergency. So the rail system came in and did what they did. I think we saw the outcome with that.
Yeah, we like I said, talked earlier with the rail unions, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way on the Rail Safety Act, and nothing, like I indicated before, has moved on that. Any of the lawmakers picking up on this right now? Or, I mean, that's what part of the show is all about, to be proactive and get the messaging out there saying, you know what, accidents happen all the time. We have to be prepared for them. We have to do a better job of being prepared for them. Is that conversation happening? And you mentioned earlier about this regional approach, because there's a lot of part of Ohio that is rural. And these communities do not have the staffing, the equipment, or the know-how to respond to these kind of things. And maybe we have to force that idea to these lawmakers. Is any of that happening right now, John?
So obviously the big topic in Ohio right now is tax reform, and that really seems to kind of be the focus. But, really, when we talk about meaningful legislation, for some reason, we have trouble in Ohio getting these types of this meaningful legislation passed. It's really going to impact the public safety, the first responders' safety. We tend to focus on other issues that aren't, in my opinion, aren't near as important as the safety of the citizens of this great state.
It's amazing to me what you have to go through just to protect firefighters. And I'm referring to Senate Bill 27, the Michael Lewis Palumbo Jr. Act, which established presumptive cancer coverage for firefighters in the state of Ohio. There's a good thing to reference here. Now, how long did it take to get that done? I mean, you're trying to protect people that are on the front lines here. John, you were involved in that fight. How difficult was that to accomplish?
It took years to get that done. Ohio is not really known for plowing new ground. We were one of the last states to get treatment for first responders for PTSD issues. We're still working on that. We got the funding for it. We got another piece of legislation. So the frustrating thing comes into the amount of money and time and resources that we had to invest to try to get the Michael Palumbo Act done, that basically just says, hey, because sometimes firefighters are 150 times more likely to get certain types of cancers. It's ridiculous that treatment is being held up by employers who are challenging these cancer claims. So basically this said, hey, it's presumptive that you got certain cancers, not all of them, on the job until proven otherwise. So that gets our members treatment and gets them hopefully well and back on the job. But that took years. It took years, and it really took one person, the speaker, to buy into it, and that's the only reason it moved.
I think back to the burn pit legislation where so many soldiers got ill overseas, and it took Jon Stewart to get on national TV to sit with them and say, you know what, we got to get this done. I mean, that's sometimes what you have to do in order to push it to the finish line. This all being said, and I look at firefighters as a calling. They're like nursing or teaching. You're not going to make a whole ton of money in these professions. You're saving lives. You're dedicating your life to save somebody else's life. And with everything that we discussed on this podcast, John, I have to ask you, are people saying, I want to be a firefighter in the state of Ohio? I would imagine there's a lot of them saying, I don't know about that. What are you hearing?
We definitely have a recruitment and retention issue in the fire service. It's not just specific to us. I know the police have the same issue too. And I think there's a lot of different reasons I think people get comfortable. People maybe don't think of it the way they used to. This is the 25th anniversary of 9/11, and we just saw such an influx of people wanting to be firefighters, first responders after those types of incidents. And luckily we don't have another one, but the attack on the pension, the increasing rates of cancer, our members are working longer, retiring with less money, and not living as long. Yeah, that paints a pretty good picture of a career that you want to walk into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, it's a calling. I mean, it's the greatest job in the world. But longevity, if I'm a young person, I'm really going to start thinking of, do they really respect that job? And is it something that has long-term stability to it?
Greatest job around, as long as you can stay alive to continue
Absolutely.
your job. Yeah, that's exactly where we are today. Well, Jon, I thank you so much for your time, your dedication, your passion, and what you do on behalf of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. Our featured guest today, Jon Harvey, president of the Ohio Association. That's OAPFF.org. And I say this to so many of our guests. You got a friend here on America's Workforce when these issues come up. If you want to move the needle in the right direction, maybe a sympathetic lawmaker saying, hey, you know what, John's got something to say. We got to listen to him. You let us know here and we'll get it on America's Workforce. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. And, just this topic alone, it was something, like you said, 3 years ago, and we quit talking about it. And the hazard, the ability for this to happen again is out there. It's no better. So thank you very much for bringing this back to something we're talking about, and hopefully we can get something done.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Tomorrow, the painters and allied trades for Trades Day on America's Workforce. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.